Hey everyone. Here what I'm doing is what I call the mapping phase of the drawing. It's just a lot of linear construction. I'm using all diagonal or straight lines. Um, Nothing really curved or contoured. This is just a really architectural breakdown of the basic elements in the picture. Basically looking for any edge, outside or inside of the form. Um, That's different from an outline, which is would be kind of seeking out just the outside edge. But here we're looking for all edges. And I think in drawing, something you'll see with me is that or painting or whatever, I'm just very interested in simplicity. I like to have just one job at a time, one thing to focus on at a time, keeping everything as approachable and accessible as possible. I think art should not be a an elite kind of activity. I think it should be something that everybody can get their hands in and really enjoy. And I think that there are a lot of really sensible solutions to making what can be really complex and terrifying to a lot of people very, very accessible. So this is one thing that I think has helped a lot of my students is just drawing in this very simple way, looking for just the most basic elements from the beginning. And I'm not going to worry too much about accuracy just yet. It's more just about kind of getting something on the canvas and then playing with it once it's there. I know that can be a little different approach to some people who really want accuracy from the get-go, but I'm not all that uptight when I draw. I think the whole thing's an evolving process, and I don't want to put down a line and then just basically create a personalized coloring book that I follow for the rest of the illustration. I think about drawing more in terms of, I guess as a painter would think about drawing, and I don't let anything get too precious in the beginning. I just really like to let the work evolve around some basic principles. So today I was working with some students that were doing some portraiture, and one of the students called me over, and they were really struggling with an ear. And said, how do you draw ears? And for some reason, I just thought of the movie The Matrix. I don't know if you've seen the original one, but there's like this really cool scene where Neo goes to see the Oracle, and there's this little kid in there, and he's like a monk. He's got a shaved head, and he's wearing like kind of this cream-colored robe, and he's bending spoons, apparently with his mind. And Neo looks at him and inquires about, like, how are you doing that? And the little kid says to him, bending the spoon's impossible, and what you have to bend is your mind. And this whole kind of like cool little moment of this mind-bending philosophy, and this is a pretty sweet little scene, one of my favorite parts of the movie. And I thought about that scene when the kid asked, well, how do I draw an ear? So I showed the clip, and found the YouTube video, showed the clip, and the whole group, we kind of got all into it. And the point being that, look, you can't draw an ear. There is no ear. An ear is a thing of flesh and cartilage, maybe a little bit of bone and tendon, of water and blood, and all kinds of things. Think about even just the cellular component of the skin cells and the mitochondria and all the things. You can't draw that. There is, in your drawing, there is no spoon, there is no ear, and all you have in your drawing is lights, darks, cools, warms, soft edges, hard edges, texture or textured areas or smooth areas. You have only the elements of art, the principles of art. You have just the tools that an artist can use to create the illusion of space, but all it is illusion. And in the picture itself, there is no ear, there is no eye, there is no hair. So when people ask, how do you draw that stuff? I say, you don't. That'd be impossible. And so what I tell them to do instead is kind of what I'm doing right now, is I just look for shapes of shadow, shapes of highlight, shapes of warm, shapes of cool. Look for the edges. Are the transitions going to be hard or soft? Are they going to be like in here, you know, there's almost going to be an unintelligible transition between the shadow of the hair. It's all just going to kind of blend into each other. That's what I'm painting. I'm not painting eyes, nose, mouth. You know, I'm just painting shapes of shadow and light. And that's super cool. It's really liberating to have no pressure. You know, I don't have to be able to draw a dog or a pony or a girl, a person, car, architecture. I don't have to be able to draw these objects. One of the things I always think about this is it just feels silly to me when people say, well, I can't draw people, or I can't draw horses, or I can't draw landscapes or whatever. And I always, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, neither can I. All I can draw is illusion. You know, I can just create these combinations of shapes of light and shadow that create the illusion of all those things. And like I said, it's a liberating approach, because then instead of trying to be a master of anatomy or of atmospheric perspective or of all the many things that an artist, you know, needs to over a lifetime of work become proficient at, maybe a master at, as you're working in that direction, you don't have to be the master of all those things. All you have to really be able to do is study light, dark, which is value, color, temperature, texture, you know, all of that stuff, and that I just said earlier. And that's what is so fun about being an artist, is your job is actually quite simple. Yes, it's incredibly important and beneficial to spend a lot of time learning everything you can about everything. An artist is sort of like, you know, have you ever been to Barnes & Noble or some bookstore and they have those like shelves of the $5.99 books, like, you know, trains or World War II garments, or garments of European soldiers, World War II, or garments of European soldiers, World War I, or a history of African architecture, or, you know, like what, some random subject, right? And people walk by and think, who would buy that? I think the people that buy that are artists, the people that are saying, well, I want to understand how this looks, or how this works, or how to make a realistic approximation of this or that or the other thing. And, you know, learning is always incredibly valuable, and it'll make your work better. It'll make everything about how you see the world richer. People are reading books about how light works and how the eye works and the psychology of the visual world, and on and on. There's tons of things that you want to just throw yourself at and engage with, and just be like a sponge to the world, the whole world. And that can seem overwhelming, but I think you don't have to do any or all of it all at once. You just take it as it comes, just living with kind of a curious spirit. But you know, as that's happening, you don't have to be the expert. What you have to do, though, is keep it simple. And keeping it simple looks like drawing shapes of shadow and highlight, trying to understand where the warms and the cools are, trying to understand if the transition is an abrupt one or if it's a subtle or soft one. And as you do that, as you just keep it simple like that, the whole thing just comes into focus. And it's tremendously satisfying in keeping it simple how rich the imagery can become. So here you can see I'm just, again, trying to keep it just dead simple, looking for as much of the big shapes as I can. I'm using, you know, I'm trying to force myself to use a bigger brush than is even comfortable, because I think the bigger brush you use, the less temptation you'll face. That temptation in the artwork is always the tantalizing and alluring kind of goal to make it look good, to make it beautiful, to make it attractive. And so if that's, you know, teasing at you, and one of the ways that we kind of, our easy mode to get there, we think, is going to be detail. I think one of the best things you can do is just avoid the temptation altogether and use as big of a brush as you can comfortably use. And that will help you avoid that nasty temptation to try to succeed or make something beautiful. I think in the end, you really want to work backwards. You don't want to work towards success. You don't want to be outcome oriented. What you want to be is curiosity oriented. You want to be process oriented. You want to say, I have one job right now, and my one job is to capture the shapes of shadow, of light and dark, to capture warms and cools, to capture the big shapes that I see. So you know, here I'm kind of betraying myself by going in here and doing some of the detail around the shadow of what will ultimately be the teeth. So you know, I kind of have to back out of that and say, okay, later, later, later. But you know, until then, using a bigger brush is cool. It does a couple other things too. And instead of just avoiding temptation, big brushes do a lot of cool things in terms of giving you a lot of serendipity in your brushwork, and it helps you create a little bit more dynamic edge as you're exploring these transitions between your lights and your darks. And if you can see here, the bigger brush I use, the less pressure I have to use, and therefore the more texture I get in the transitions. And the softer that texture is, the kind of more luscious that the transitions in the skin feel, the more realistic in a way, and also the more just bold and confident. And you all know, you mean, like there's almost nothing so beautiful as something that is bold and confident, especially in artwork where we can get so stuck and so worried about making it just so. You can see a lot of what I'm doing here as I'm doing these brushworks. I'm starting with this dark, and then I'll sample a little of the mix as I brush a lighter color over the dark, and then I'll sample the mix and use that to kind of move down into the lower parts of the neck where it's not going to be quite as dark. There's not going to be such a direct cast shadow. I love doing that brush over and then resample, brush over and resample, and it gives me a lot of kind of naturalistic transitions, real soft transitions between one value and another. So here I'm going to brush in a little color, just sample it right at its kind of softest point. The thing I love about painting is it's almost impossible to ruin it, especially in digital. You just paint over anything you feel like is a mistake. You just get to surge forward and try out ideas. If you don't like it, you hit Control Z and just undo. It's a place where you can be literally fearless with your work, and there's very little risk. You know, the worst thing that can happen is you lose a little bit of time. But I don't think there's ever such a thing as lost time in a painting, because quite literally, everything you're doing, if you're paying any amount of attention, you're learning from.